So today I'm going to show you how I sample my fibre to get the kind of thickness and degree of twist that I want for a given project. So I've been using these mini combs, which are Louis, and this is Polworth, which I have now combed into a top. So it's quite a fine fleece, so I wouldn't expect to be able to spin this terribly thick. In fact, it's lends itself very well to fine lace weight yarns. So the picture that I showed at the front showed various different samples of yarn spun from quite fine down to relatively thick for this kind of fibre. None of it is extremes at either end because I want it to be, although a fairly decent lace weight, I don't want it to be super fine. And so this is basically how I go about it. So I'm starting off with my wheel setup on a middle of the range wool, so it's on about 10:1 ratio, and I'll get the thing going. So basically, once I've got a decent join, I start to sample the yarn. So basically what I'm doing is I'll start off with quite a fine yarn. So this is basically, it's not super fine, but it would make a nice lace weight. Now because Polworth is a merino cross originally, it has quite a puffy quality to it, so it will end up looking a lot thicker when it's plied than most people would expect. So I'm taking that into account as well. And then once I've spun enough to be able to do a reasonable length of plied back yarn, I'm going to stop the wheel, I'm going to double this back, let it hang. So this yarn is now properly balanced because it's found its own level, being freshly spun. So we can see this is nicely spun. It's got a reasonable amount of twist in it without it being strangled. So I'm going to keep that sample, put it to one side, and then my next one I'm going to spin just a little bit thicker. So again, I'll get my join. I'm spinning from the butt end of the fibre when I spin this because I want the fibre to lie into the twist in the direction that the scales are on the actual sheep. So I'm going to start and thicken this up a little bit now. So I've slowed my treadling a little bit, I've slowed my hands a little bit, and I'm not drafting quite the same distance as I was before, although my hands are far enough apart to allow me to draft it. And then once I've got enough of this, I'll let it double back again. So if I compare this one to this one, you can see already that's a little bit thicker. Twist is still nicely developed, not overly done. It's still got some bounce in it. And I'm going to spin one that's a little bit thicker again. Make sure I've got the right end. Okay. So at this point, because I'm not going super thick, I don't need to change the ratio of my wheel as yet, but if I do one a little bit thicker in a while, then I might do. So I'll get this going. So I've slowed my foot down even more. Let me just take that slobby bit out. My hands are working a little bit quicker because I want this to be a little bit thicker, but not overly twisted. So I'm keeping my eye on the drafting zone all the time. It's the bit between my two hands, and I'm not letting stray fibre run in. If we stop there, I'll double this one back. And we are a little bit thicker again. Okay, so it's got a little bit less twist this time because it's a little bit thicker, and I don't want to strangle those extra fibres. So the next one I'm going to spin even thicker. So I'm going to change my wheel to the slower ratio. This one's about 5 to 5.5 to 1. So the twist is developing a lot slower by itself now. So for each treadle I get less twist in the drafting zone. I might have to speed my foot up if I feel like I'm having to wait for it. So this is how I decide what feels and looks right for me, for what I want the finished fabric to be. Bearing in mind this will be knitted. So I'll stop there. I'll double this one back. So there we are, a little bit thicker again. This is actually quite a nice yarn. You can see it's got this nice sort of beaded effect to it, which I like. You can get from Polworth really nicely. Now, whether or not this is suitable for what I want to knit is another thing. I do like this yarn, but for what I want it to do, it's going to be a little bit too thick. This one's going to be a little bit too thin for what I want it to do. And this one is much more the thickness that I want it to be. So I'm going to match this one for all of my spinning now. I hope this has given you some ideas of how to grade your thickness and twist, and hopefully it'll help you on your spinning journey.